Hello, welcome in. Welcome to my April reading wrap up. I'm convinced that I'm going to be able to hold this microphone in the same place for the whole of the video instead of clipping it to my jumper because I hate the way it looks clipped to my jumper, but we'll see. So hopefully this sounds okay, this video. If you're new to my channel, welcome in. My name's Charlotte. I do monthly reading wrap ups, and if you're a returning viewer, welcome back. I'm realizing that the time you see this, it's probably going to be like very late May. I tried to be organized and I just really have been in a reading slump, and filming this video has felt really, really difficult for some reason. It's not even difficult now. I've got all of the thoughts and the notes in front of me, but I've been in a bit of a reading slump for like 2 months. Not a huge one, but you know, just a bit of a reading slump. So yeah, it's felt difficult like getting my thoughts out onto paper and just talking about books that I barely enjoyed. Perhaps that's not a very optimistic tone to start the video on, but yeah, if you're new to my channel, welcome in. I would consider myself usually an avid reader. I set no reading targets for the year. I tend to be what I would consider a mood reader, I guess. And you can find all of my reading wrap ups for the last 2 years on my YouTube channel. I do also have a BookTok account, but I haven't posted on that in a really long time. So I read 4 books in the month of April. To be honest, this was to be expected. I was away for like 2 to 3 weeks of April, and you know what? I had a 13-hour plane journey and I knew I was in a reading slump when I barely read on it. I found it really hard to engage with the book I was reading. So yeah, I think I've just been in a bit of a space where I just don't know what it is that I want to read. I am on my way out of this reading slump. I've read 2 quite good books in May. Well, 1.5. I'm halfway through my second one, but I did read a really good book in May that I've been really pleased with, and I'm looking forward to reviewing that. But yeah, without further ado, let's get reviewing. My notes are slightly off to the right of the camera, so if you see me glancing down at any point, that's why. It's just so I can make sure I capture everything accurately for you. So actually this month I read no physical books. I read 4 Kindle books and 1 audiobook, and my first read was an audiobook, and it was Motherthing by Ainsley Hogarth. This is in the genre of horror, but I will get onto my thoughts on the genre shortly. I'll do a quick little synopsis. I like to just give you a brief overview of what the book is about. This book centres around our main couple, Abby and Ralph. Abby and Ralph have just moved in with Ralph's mother, Laura, and Abby is hoping that this will bring their relationship a little bit closer together with her mother-in-law. Unfortunately, this doesn't materialise in the way that Abby is hoping, as Laura is pretty cruel and mean and venomous, and even more so to Abby. In an unexpected turn of events, when Laura takes her own life, the ghost of her mother-in-law hangs over Ralph and Abby in many different ways. Laura seems to have an otherworldly grip on Ralph, on the household, and on Abby, and Abby has so much love in her heart, in her life to give, that she will do anything she can to get Laura to release her grip on them all. Did someone say girl dinner? This book was a funny read for me. I found it really hard to engage with at some points, but then I also found myself really gripped at times. To summarise, my reading experience of it was very inconsistent, but then also I think I'm partly to blame because I think that's kind of where I was at as a reader when I picked this up. I was saying earlier that I was in like a little bit of a reading slump, and I think this kind of didn't help. Almost a reading slump, not quite, was in that space where I wasn't sure what I wanted to read. So it is a very feverish read. I think it feels like a weird dream-like sequence of events. But to revisit the genre, I do not think this is what I would consider a horror book, and I do think it's maybe a little bit misleading. I was expecting more of like a traditional horror. I guess it really does depend on how you define your parameters of a horror novel. To be honest, this is probably more what I would define as horror adjacent rather than a traditional horror, but yeah, I guess it's your personal reading experience of it. It wasn't quite what I expected, but I did appreciate the weirdness of it all. This is kind of falling into that unhinged woman, unreliable narrator, good for her genre that is popular at the moment. That's kind of like a sub-genre of a lot of horror, I guess. Quite like a domestic horror. Prime example of what I would consider mummy issues. And if you love this like unhinged, unreliable female narrative voice, I think you would really like this book. You know, like the impulsive woman. Despite all this, I found myself not really loving it for a reason that I can't quite pin down or put my finger on. I think perhaps it was maybe a little bit too nonsensical for me, although I imagine that this is part of the point of the read, that it is kind of this strange, lyrical, not really sure what's here nor there, not really sure what's real and what's not real. I do think generally hauntings aren't really my bag, and neither are ghost stories. I tend to shy away from this particular genre of horror. I prefer something that is a bit more solid, a bit more of this plane, maybe like a little bit more, I don't even want to say based in reality, because a lot of horror isn't based in reality. Yeah, I just maybe think this ghostly kind of spectre type thing isn't really my favourite. Ultimately, it's a stream of consciousness from a very, very mentally ill narrator and main character. And I think there are a lot of long and rambling descriptions of like the grotesque and of body horror and of just general yucky descriptions of, you know, bodily functions, a bit a Tessa Moshfeghi style. But for some reason that just didn't really hit with me. It didn't land. I think that is usually a tried and true formula for me enjoying a book, but there was just something about this that just felt a bit stilted for me. I will say the dark humour did save it. There was a lot of dark humour that I did actually find really entertaining at points, and it added a bit of a lightness to the book that made it feel like it wasn't taking itself too seriously. I don't think the main character does take herself too seriously, but yeah, I don't know. This is not really a very substantial review because to me this didn't feel like a very substantial book. I think the whole thing was just vibes really, and it wasn't good and it wasn't bad, and that was my reading experience of it. It was just okay. I don't know if bland is the correct way to describe it because I don't think the subject matter or how the book kind of played out was bland, but it was bland for me. My next book was an audiobook, and it's the first time in a long while I've done an audiobook actually, and I read Carmilla by J. Sheridan Le Fanu, and this is a gothic horror. Deep in the forests of Austria, our main character Laura lives a very quiet life with only her father, her teacher, and a sort of attendant chaperone living with her. They are her only company until one night when a carriage crashes out the forest in the middle of the night, and the said carriage contains a guest, a beautiful and enchanting guest called Carmilla. And from the carriage appearing, so blossoms a newfound friendship, a newfound intense friendship between Carmilla and Laura. A friendship that is rooted in strange events and a lot of eroticism. It's the only way I can describe it. But as Carmilla's behaviour grows stranger, Laura becomes weaker. I didn't actually know this, but this is largely known as one of the earliest works ever recorded of vampire fiction. So I listened to this on audiobook. It's been in my short story list for ages. It's very, very short, like 100 or so pages, and it's just been on my list, you know. I just haven't managed to get to it. I'm actually really glad I listened to it because of where I was at in my reading slump. But I'm not going to lie, I do think this is one of those books that I would probably get more from reading it physically, which I rarely kind of say that about audiobooks. I would absolutely love to get my hands on the physical copy of this and give it a reread. I think I would get a lot more from it. I picked it because I saw that it was only 3 hours and I just needed something a little bit non-committal. Sapphic, gothic, sexy, scary. Despite how short this book is, I was surprised that it does get kind of like creepier and creepier and creepier. And it does feel a lot longer than it actually is as it starts to like slowly unwind and unspool. I'd imagine for its time, at the time it was written, it was considered like very openly sexy. And I do still think it is quite sexy, even by today's standards, where obviously we have a lot of kind of obvious smut written out there. But something about the formality of the language, like the context of the time it's written, the context of the book, you know, this kind of sense of propriety, the general scandal of it all made it feel very like I was clutching my pearls. I loved it because I love gay vampires. I love vampires being anything other than crusty old white men from the crypt. I love vampires being otherworldly in a sense that is so much more than their perhaps decrepit, dusty, crusty, musty, falling apart physical appearance. What I think was captured so well in Carmilla was this feverish, strange, otherworldly, eternal, nightmarish plane of existence that Laura and Carmilla were held in, and what Carmilla captured Laura in essentially. It wasn't just a mutual infatuation, it was like a transcendence into like a zone that is beyond our understanding, that's almost beyond description. But the author did such a fantastic job of describing it in this very gothic, splendid way that feels so opulent and so decadent and full of metaphor and drama. Like the infatuation that they were in almost felt like conceptual because it was so beyond description. It's giving Desires of the Flesh, you know? Like rather than just saying this is how good it was, we were existing on the edges of the way that Laura and Carmilla experienced it as much as we could without actually being there. I think I want to read the book because after listening, my initial reaction was that I felt slightly underwhelmed, even though it doesn't sound like that now. But it's now actually only on reflection that I realised there was something very captivating about this book that I can't really pinned down. There's something peculiar about it. There's something gripping about the energy. It was dark, it was captivating, and now I realise I really like it. The next book I read was a digital book on my Kindle, and it was Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood, and this is a romance book. So Elsie is a theoretical physicist who is currently toiling away as an adjunct professor on a track to achieving tenure. This earns her shit money, so she has a second job, and her second job is being a professional girlfriend. Professional fake girlfriend who uses her lifelong experience of just generally being a doormat and a people pleaser to kind of anticipate the needs of her clients and show up in the perfect way. One of her clients' brothers is actually onto her. His name is Jack Smith, and he's determined to figure her out. He can sense that she's a fake, and he is under the impression that she is playing her brother, perhaps for money. So he is naturally quite out to get her, but he also sits on the hiring committee of Elsie's dream physics job. So he is currently standing between her and that. I think I'm breaking up with Ali Hazelwood, you know. Yeah, this has been a real ride. I am an Ali Hazelwood apologist usually. I really like her books. I think there is a formula to them, and a formula that works very well. But I just maybe think the last couple I've tried to read just haven't hit the same. I'm wondering if my tastes have changed as well, or maybe I'm just bored of her writing style. I DNF'd one of hers last month, which is fine. I forgot to include it in my wrap up, but it's not that relevant, to be honest. And I don't have one big glaring reason that I don't really like this book, just lots of little ones. As always, I do always just think maybe it was the space I was in when I read it that made me less forgiving of this book. I think I'm maybe perhaps in my more critical era of reading than I have been previously. So I think first things first, I think I was exasperated by this whole fake girlfriend plot, because to be honest, I just think if you want to write a sex worker into your book, just write a sex worker into your book. It felt like she was skirting around making Elsie a sex worker. And I say this with the understanding that if you are dating for money and it's a transactional service, you are still a sex worker regardless of whether you provide intimate physical services or not. But it felt like there was so much emphasis in the book specifically of this, like, well, I don't do that. Like, I don't do that. I don't do this, I don't do that. And also this kind of like, I'm definitely not going to call her a sex worker. I'm going to keep calling her a fake girlfriend. And I'm going to make it very clear multiple times that there is no sense of physical intimacy involved in a transactional way. And I don't know, it just didn't sit quite right with me. And I'm not saying that she needs to be a full service sex worker for the story to feel believable to me. It felt a bit like shoehorned in, a bit contrived. And the thing is, like, I'm not anti-sex worker ever. Like, just let me get that straight. So it's not about the fact that the story was inclusive of a sex worker, but it was that there was so much to kind of set her apart from like other sex workers that I was just like, I don't know. I know it's supposed to just be like a light-hearted storyline of a girl like trying to get herself through her shit job with like a bit of extra money and she gets rumbled, but maybe I take that stuff kind of badly because that's like obviously people's reality. I think what annoyed me about it is that obviously like if we had an adjunct professor at a university who was a very respected physicist and it was discovered that she was like moonlighting as a sex worker in any capacity, whether it be full service or, you know, like girlfriending service, I think I know the reality that she would probably lose her job across multiple angles and have her reputation tarnished. So I think maybe I was just being a bit too serious when I read that, and I found it hard to be like, well, this is a fun light thing, because I'm sat there thinking like this would ruin someone's life, or because a man wants to expose her. Once again, look at me taking that way too seriously. It's just a fun book and I just didn't have fun with it. That aside, the first half was okay. I will say the premise to me did feel like such a reach, but it did make me laugh because it kind of felt like it was beyond the realm of possibility, and I think that's what you get with a lot of Ali Hazelwood books, right? Clearly I'm just a fucking wet blanket. I wasn't really sure how it would wrap up, and I think that's what kept me reading. Like, what do you mean? The brother of the guy you're fake dating has a nickname that means you won't realize that he is on the hiring committee for the dream physics job that you want, but he's also the guy that ruined your mentor's career and has tarnished experimental physicists and created ripples throughout the theoretical versus experimental physicist kind of community. What do you mean? How are you going to wrap that up? I didn't think the mentor storyline would wrap up very neatly, but she did manage it, and I was like, okay, I didn't see that coming. Overall, I think what happened happened for me is that I didn't really connect to her character, which just led to my overall lack of enjoyment. It just didn't feel believable. The romance didn't feel believable. I felt like Jack and Elsie didn't really have any chemistry. I don't know if he was that well written compared to a lot of her other male characters. They just weren't that convincing to me. And also I didn't really like Elsie's temperament. It's possible that I found the people pleasing a bit too far. People pleasing generally like doesn't really resonate with me, which I completely understand. You know, we don't only read books that resonate with us, but I think that element of the story was taken so far. At some points I found it quite frustrating. Like, your man is telling you multiple times how hot, sexy and attractive he finds you, and he wants to take you out, but you're in such denial that you literally think when he refers to taking you out, he's gonna murder you. Like, and dude's a fucking physicist. Like, what do you mean? What do you think he's gonna murder you? I don't know. Like, I know that Ali Hazelwood's thing is this like millennial inner monologue, but it just hit me the wrong way. Maybe I found it a bit cringy. I won't slag it off anymore. I won't be rude anymore about it, because I think perhaps maybe this book just wasn't a good fit for me, especially in the space I was when I was reading it. Maybe this book just wasn't a good fit for me. I found her books very hit and miss for me. I probably will still persevere with them, because the books by Ali Hazelwood I have really liked, but yeah, this maybe just wasn't it. So the last book I read of the month was another digital book on my Kindle, and it was Vicious by V.E. Schwab, and this is a fantasy book, fantasy sci-fi, I think. So Victor and Eli were originally roommates at college. They were both kind of drawn to each other's lone wolf syndrome, both very academically smart, both quite sharp, but loners nonetheless. They recognised the sense of ambition in each other. They have an academic shared interest in the concept of EOs. EOs are extraordinary human beings who have supernatural abilities, usually at the expense of a traumatic near-death experience. Their thesis on EOs starts to move from purely academic to entirely experimental and goes horribly wrong. The story starts 10 years later with Victor breaking out of prison, determined to find his previous friend, now turned foe, Eli. Meanwhile, Eli is on a mission to eradicate every single person he can find with a supernatural ability. So this book actually took me a very long time to work my way through, but I really ended up liking it. Obviously, I've heard about V.E. Schwab before, mainly The Secret Life of Addie LaRue, and that's been in my pile for a long time, but I haven't wanted to pick it up because I get a bit intimidated by books that are very highly regarded, because I get worried I'm not going to like them, or that it's got like a predetermined set of expectations in my head. So I picked up this one. I didn't realise this is part of a trilogy, I believe, so I will be going on to read the second ones. I can't remember what the series is called. Usually I include that, sorry. It gives me a kind of like young adult Smallville, the OA supernatural vibe that felt really nostalgic to me. When I say young adult, it's not that it's very young adult in nature or content, because some of the content is quite violent and graphic in it, and I probably wouldn't class it as young adult. It's probably that oftentimes it's set in a college or school, but the writing just felt quite jaunty. And I think the reason I call it YA is because there is something super nostalgic about the writing and the style and how I felt reading it. Big anti-hero vibe. If you love anti-heroes or you love villains who are very villainous, you will enjoy this. I really liked the concept of both characters and both protagonists not being good versus evil. It comes quite quickly apparent that they are just villainous versus villainous, evil versus evil. And even though it initially feels like good versus evil, it's kind of like, oh, okay, you're both kind of fucked here. If you want a book of villains really committed to being villains, you should read this probably. Both of them are as bad as each other. Both of them leave a trail of death and destruction, all purely kind of backing their own agenda and their own motive, but for their own reasons. Eli is fantastically evil and, to be honest, quite delusional. Victor is less delusional, but more driven by revenge and purpose. You'll still end up picking a side regardless, I think. I'm not usually that into a book with like multiple timelines, because I can sometimes find the chopping and changing a little bit complicated. I know that's not a very clever thing of me to say, but I do feel like it worked really well in this, and it actually added to the story quite a lot. It also makes a world of a difference when the multiple timelines are made clear, like when they are. Yeah, that's very silly girl of me to say, but the switch is basically just between present day and 10 years earlier. This wasn't a 5-star for me, and I'm not really sure why, but this was a very good read for me, and I will be going on to read the other books, and I would really recommend it. It was dark, it was dramatic, the writing was really compelling, the chapters were structured really well in a way that was very punchy and like the end of the chapters left the full amount of the impact. It made it a page turner despite my reading slump, and I think that's probably why I struggled to get into it, but then I found myself really whizzing through it. Right amount of action for me, perfect amount actually. Right amount of good characterization, and also there was found family in it, which, you know, I love a little found family trope. I'm a real sucker for it. Anyway, so that was my April reading wrap up. A really mixed bag, as you can see, but mostly, you know, 50% wins, 50% losses. I'm already having a better reading month. I'm still kind of slow behind it. I think 4 books in a month for me isn't bad by any stretch of the imagination, but having seen like some of my previous months, I think a very good month for me is about 10. My usual is anywhere between 6 to 8. So 4 for me definitely is slow. I think I'm just having the thing at the moment where I'm struggling to know what to read. And every book I'm kind of picking up is not really hitting. So I think I do just need to stop picking up whatever and just going for it. But yeah, thanks so much for watching. As always, I'll put my story graph in the description box below. You can follow me on there to see what's up next, to see what I'm currently reading. Obviously, you get a bit more of a live snapshot of what I'm reading versus having to wait for these videos. If you did like today's video, please drop a like, drop a subscribe, and if you have any recommendations for me, I would love to hear them. I'm struggling with books at the moment, so yeah, that would be great. Thank you so much. I'll see you on the next video. My upload schedule is every Sunday and every other Wednesday, and have a lovely rest of your day.